Our presenter for this topic of ending food insecurity while navigating the coronavirus storm is here with us as Chief Executive Officer of the nation's largest domestic hunger relief organization and the second largest U.S. charity according to Forbes. Feeding America is a nationwide network of 200 food banks and 60,000 food pantries and meals programs. Together, the Feeding America network provides more than 4 billion meals to more than 46 million people across the United States, and supports programs that improve food security for the families we serve. Prior to joining Feeding America, Ms. Claire spent 13 years as a part of Walmart's leadership team, with her most recent role being Executive Vice President and Global Treasurer. In this role, she had global responsibility for tax, treasury operations, capital markets, investor relations, global risk management, casualty and self-insurance, leading teams across 28 countries and over 1,000 associates worldwide. On the topic of ending food insecurity while navigating the coronavirus storm, here is Clara Babineaux-Fontenot, Esquire.
Well, I must start by commending you on the pronunciation of that last name. Not many get it. Not many get it right. And I want to thank all of you for having me. A special thank you to Dr. Beatty for her remarkable leadership and for her confidence that I might be able to be of value this afternoon. So with that said, it was mentioned from my bio that I came to this role after serving in finance, and I found that often when I was called upon to speak, people were a little bit curious about what the timing might be for a presentation from someone who had responsibility for something like tax before I joined Feeding America. And I've got to tell you, people would be particularly concerned if they put the person who's over finance at Walmart right after lunch, as it's already hard enough to retain the attention of audiences in general. To retain the attention of audiences after lunch when you're in finance has often been quite the task. So I thought, wow, here we are in similar circumstances. And I want to begin my conversation with you by starting with September of 1963, which probably now really has everyone in the audience going, oh, this is going to be a long one. I hope you had coffee with your lunch. But I think it is only appropriate that I begin my comments with September of 1963, because that was a really important year in my life and in the lives of my family. It helped to define how we define family to this day. It was in September of 1963 that my mother was pregnant with me, and that she learned that there were 2 little kids in a neighboring town who were suffering from neglect and abuse. While my father was away at work, my mom picked up those babies and she brought them home. By the time my dad got back from work, his family had doubled. And what neither of them had any concept of was how many trips like that one they would take over the course of their marriage. Altogether, my parents were mom and dad to 108 children, including the incredibly privileged me. If I were there in a room with you guys, I know I'd feel so honored, as I do now, speaking to you virtually, to have an opportunity to speak. But as I've often said, as remarkable as this opportunity is, there will never be one that rivals the fact that I gave the keynote address when my parents were inducted into the National Adoption Hall of Fame. There are lots of things that I learned growing up in that household. Some of the things I learned my parents wish I didn't know, but I've known my whole life. I've always understood what trauma looks like in many instances. I've always understood that unlike many moms and dads who would talk to their kids when they were picky eaters and share with them that they needed to eat their food because there were hungry children in distant shores like Africa or China, that there was a reason that would never be uttered in our household, because we all understood that hunger is right here. In the richest country in the history of civilization, hunger is right here. There are tens of millions of children who struggle under the weight of food insecurity in this country. Before COVID, 22 million children qualified for free and reduced lunch. So many families just live right on the edge. And as a result of COVID, so many of them fell off. Before COVID, 35 million people were food insecure, according to the USDA. During COVID, at one moment in time, we had estimates that that number could be as many as 55 million people. COVID had lots of impacts on the whole world. And I was taught when I was at Walmart about this phrase. I've been told that I wrongly learned that it's a Mandarin term, but the sentiment stuck. I was told that the Mandarin word for crisis is a combination of two words, one representing danger and the other representing opportunity. And though that might not be what that word really stands for, as I said, the sentiment stuck. It stuck. In every crisis, there is a combination of danger and opportunity. COVID is one of those. We saw, as a result of COVID, some things that were hidden in plain sight for a very long time. When we were all stuck at home, when we were actually not able to leave our houses, when our eyes were fixed on televisions, what we saw was how many people struggle. We saw that there's certain communities that struggle inordinately. People in rural America, especially the rural South, have struggled more than any other region in this country for a very long time. Communities of color have struggled no matter where they live for a very long time. Inside of that bright light, we also saw the remarkable resiliency of this network that I'm so privileged to serve as a part of. The Feeding America Network, who counts among us in this big family. A food bank that's not very far away from where you guys are, under the remarkable leadership of Dr. Charles Beatty, who counts among us 199 additional food banks, and as was already said, 60,000 food pantries and meal programs across the country, over 2 million volunteers. I heard the quote, and I thought it fitting that that would be the numbers, those would be the numbers that would be shared. I don't know if you remember, but in the intro, it was said that Feeding America provides 4.5 billion meals to people in need. Well, during the pandemic, I told you those numbers soared in terms of the need. What we didn't talk about yet, or I didn't discuss yet, is how many headwinds we had. Of course, there was a global health pandemic. But about 50% of the people who were turning to us for help during the pandemic, and it's still true today, about 40% now, had never before relied upon the charitable food system. Do you remember when those grocery store shelves were empty? One of the primary sources of food for our network, retailers. If they don't have anything to sell, they certainly don't have anything to donate. At that time, there was a lot of struggle in trying to get access to shelf-stable foods. Our network found itself competing with the likes of major retailers like the one that I used to work for. At the time that we were out there trying to get access to more food, knowing that we were going to need to buy a lot of it, retail grocery prices were at a 50-year high. They still are. So against all of those headwinds, how many meals do you suppose our network provided? So it was 4.5 billion meals. I like to say that in terms of, okay, so to get to 1 billion, that means I have to go to 999 million and then add one. 4.5 billion. Against all of those headwinds, and in the middle of a pandemic where the members of our team were open because people were in need, the members of our team did not have the option of working from home, so many of them. They were out there on the front lines, putting themselves at risk, not knowing what it meant. How many meals do you think? 6.1 billion meals. So with those headwinds, with all those challenges, the members of the Feeding America Network provided 6.1 billion meals. And this year, our estimate is we're going to provide about 6.5 billion meals. When I have a chance to introduce myself, I say my name, and I love to say my title, but I do not tend to just say them back to back. Instead, I say, my name is Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, and it is my great privilege to serve as CEO of Feeding America. I have not ever had a greater professional privilege than I do right now doing this work. Now, everybody who's participating in this meeting understands, you understand about adverse child experiences, and you understand the terrible impact that a lack of access to a nutritious mix of food can have on a child, not only on their bodies, but also on their spirits. I hope you also have gotten to see what I got to see in that big family of mine, which is the restorative power of nutritious food on both. All of the outcomes that are so much more favorable when children and adults get access to the foods that they need. I often say, when I talk to someone who shares with me what it is that they care the most about, and when they do that in a way that suggests to me that maybe food insecurity is not their issue, I can usually, if I have enough time, help them to understand that whatever it is that they care about, if it positively impacts the lives of people, then they should care about food insecurity. If they care about education, they should care about food insecurity. If they care about the economy, they should care about food insecurity. If they care about medical outcomes, they should care about food insecurity. If they care about mental and emotional health outcomes, they should care about food insecurity. The work that I get to do in partnership with people like Dr. Beatty is work that's so foundational that every positive thing we want for human beings flows directly from it. So I am privileged to serve in this role. I'm honored to have an opportunity to talk to you guys today. I'm open to a Q&A where you get to decide where we go next. But I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to talk about what we've been through, But before we get to Q&A, not only do I want to celebrate the work that was done by our members and our agency partners, but I also want to celebrate the partnership that we have with the American public. People have stepped up in ways that they never have before. We have old partnerships that have gone deeper and wider. We have brand new partners, big, medium, and small. I want to honor every investment that's ever made in our work. Whether it's me being here in my office in Chicago and opening an envelope where there are coins or a $1 bill from a child or an adult for whom that is a significant contribution. Or if it's having the opportunity to participate in a process that leads to transformational gifts from large donors. Every investment counts, and I honor every single one of them. I knew as a child that one of the biggest issues that we have in this country when it comes to food insecurity was that people just don't understand what the need is. It's just not the way that we think about ourselves as a country. It's not part of the American consciousness. What I've seen and what gives me so much hope is that when the American public understood, I felt we would stand up and we would deliver. And I'm very pleased to report that every indication is that I was right. And that even applies to politicians. There aren't a lot of things that politicians agree on. But throughout this pandemic and across more than one presidential administration, we have received investments in our work. We encourage people to recognize that food insecurity is so foundational that it impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not, and that this is one of those issues that should be a 100% issue. So thanks for having me. And I'm very open to going wherever you'd like me to go by way of questions.
Thank you so much, and for sharing as our participants are dropping their questions into the box there. I'm fascinated, I have to admit, by your story and how you began and got to where you are. It reminds us that it doesn't matter what walk of life we're in, what we're doing for a living, that being a part of the change is something that any of us can do. Doesn't matter if I'm in finance or if I work in a beauty shop. You're right, hunger affects all of us, and looking at the statistics in such a rich nation is mind-blowing. 108 children. That's definitely one for the record books, but it does also underscore why you are so passionate about what you do and why it's a position as CEO of Feeding America that you will never take for granted. So thank you for your passion, as well as the information that you've shared. We do have a question here. If they want to know if you can share the Jeff Bezos 100 million donation to Feeding America. Several community-based organizations on the Zoom gallery are with us on the Zoom gallery, and they want you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I mentioned that that I aspire to ensure that we honor every investment that's made in our work. I'll tell you that the Jeff Bezos gift of $100 million represented the largest single contribution, I believe, that had ever been made to our work in its history. And one of the things that made it particularly impactful would certainly be that it was $100 million. But another was, when that gift happened, our members were scrambling. They were turning on a dime. They had to completely change our distribution methodology. I don't know how much you know about the way we generally work, but our members get access to food. Our members then share that food inside of a network of meal programs and agency partners So many of our partners don't even realize they're part of the Feeding America family, for instance, because it might be a basement pantry inside of a church that receives a significant amount of its food from our membership. Well, during that time, one of the challenges that we've historically had is that a significant majority of our volunteers inside of those pantries and outside of those pantries are over 65. So we started getting information in about what are the things that make COVID-19 most deadly for people and present the biggest health challenges. And we learned that if you were elderly, that was one of those things that made it more deadly. So there we are, we've got this great volunteer workforce, many of whom were at inordinate risk. We had some safety protocols that we needed to put in place where we had to be more efficient on the one hand, and also make certain that we limited how much physical contact people had so that we could protect the people in need of our services and also protect the members of our team who are out there trying to provide those services. So we had to turn it on a dime. So you started seeing people flow through lines, and we put food inside the backs of cars, very limited contact with people during that time. Well, that represented a complete change in our distribution model. And remember, I was saying before, we had all of these headwinds that was making the work that we're doing far more expensive. We had a regulatory environment that said in order to provide food to children, certain federal food to children, that you had to bring them all together because that was the most efficient way to provide food to kids. So in congregate settings, we had to fight and work hard to make certain that those regulations that might have made sense outside of a pandemic environment were put aside so that we could actually deliver the food that we needed to the kids. So while all of this is going on, and there's so much concern, and while our members are staying up late at night, barely sleeping, one of the most powerful things about the Bezos gift was it gave a shot in the arm to their work. It was this huge demonstration that people were noticing and that people cared and that they were willing to invest in the things that we were out there doing. So it was my privilege to participate in the process of making certain that we understood what Mr. Bezos's expectations were, that our members were well positioned to deliver against those expectations, but our members would have some expectations as well, and that those expectations might be met. And I don't believe I'll ever forget getting that phone call that ultimately led to, within, it was less than days before the process was earnestly underway to deliver that money. And now I visit our members. I will definitely get to the great state of Mississippi. I'm planning a trip soon. But I visit each of our members. I'm on track to visit every single one of them, in fact. And when I go out, one of the things that we talk about when I'm touring a food bank is people will often say, so you see that forklift, but for the Bezos gift, we wouldn't have that. You see this equipment right here, but for the Bezos gift, we wouldn't have that. We had just done we did what we call pulse surveys, which is one of the benefits of being a part of a national organization, is that we knew, if you guys may remember now, everything just, it was such a different time and space continuum. But hotspots for COVID were popping up in different places, right? And we were seeing businesses shut down, and then the financial impact of those businesses shutting down, and the medical impact of those areas becoming hotspots having inordinate impact on certain local communities. So we started tapping into our network and asking our members, hopefully not in too onerous a way, asking our members what was going on the ground, what were they seeing? And that's one of our benefits, is we can help a donor or someone who wants to help. We can help them to understand what's happening where. So one of the things that we asked was, how we asked our members to share if they had at least 3 weeks worth of food left in their warehouses. Could they handle another 3 weeks? And at the time that the Bezos gift was coming on board online, that was the highest point of no's to that question. The largest number of members who did not have at least 3 weeks of food left. So those big distributions where sometimes we're feeding over 10,000 families, that they were struggling to figure out, how am I going to get out? How am I going to feed these people who so desperately need us? Some of the saddest conversations I've ever had in my career are conversations I've had with members during that time who cheerfully communicated, my community needs me and I don't know how I'm going to help. So the Bezos gift had a real restorative power on our work, both through actually getting resources on the ground, and we had to turn them around very quickly. So getting those resources on the ground where they were needed so desperately, but also kind of like an infusion of energy for a team of people who had been working night and day, burning that candle at both ends.
I know that you mentioned early on, that's the phone call, the day of the phone call is one that you'll always remember. I would imagine that was like just flipping the script that day. Someone asked, how does one donate to Feeding America? Is that on the website or just a regular Joe who wants to be a part of making a difference?
Well, great. So thank you for that question. So the best way to do it is to go to feedingamerica.org. And what I recommend to people is start by, we've got a food bank locator on that website. It's a great website for lots of things. So I want to walk through a few things you can do by going on the website. But the first thing that I recommend that you do is go into the food bank locator and put in the zip code of a community that you care desperately about. Like, for instance, I live in Chicago now. Chicago is home for me. So I put in 60611. But I'm actually from Opelousas, Louisiana, and I still care about Opelousas, Louisiana. So I put in 70570. One of the beautiful things about this whole big network that we're part of is whatever community is, it might be where you met the person that you love. It might be where you went to school. Whatever that community is that you care the most about, if you put the zip code in to that food bank locator, there will be a member of our team that's working inside of that community. If you'd like to be a part of the national movement, and if you want us to help you to evaluate where the money can go, where it's needed the most, then you can donate directly to Feeding America as well. But one of the most powerful tools I believe we have on that website is knowledge. You can learn about food insecurity. You can learn about its impact on communities. You can learn about what's happening in which communities. There's a lot of data there. And in addition to dollars, which of course we need dollars, of course we need food. When you go into the food bank locator, you reach out directly to the food bank. They'll tell you what they need the most. But of course we're going to need dollars. Of course we're going to need food. But what we also are going to need are voices. So we're going to need people like all of you who care so much about children to use your voices in combination with ours to lift up how important this issue is. It is a solvable challenge inside of our society. There is no good reason for 35 million people before the pandemic, 55 million people during the pandemic. There's no good reason for one person in this country to be food insecure. And the good news is we can do something about it. We can do something about it together. So please access feedingamerica.org, where you can learn all kinds of ways to be helpful. And thank you for asking. Normally, Evelyn, by the way, I have a sister named Evelyn, but of course I have a sister named just about everything, since I do have 107 siblings. But normally I try to slip that one in. I'm so happy that this audience gave me the opportunity in a fulsome way to address how you can help. So thank you.
Going back to something you just said about there not being one reason why someone should go hungry in America, is that one of your biggest frustrations, or what is your biggest frustration as it relates to food insecurity?
Mm. I don't even know if I would call it frustration. Um, but maybe I certainly feel frustrated at times. So there's some math. So I always said that I have a head for math and a heart for people, right? And that in this work I get to connect them. So let me talk about some math that doesn't make sense to me, or that might be frustrating math on the one hand. But when you flip it around, it's actually wonderful because it says things are solvable. Before the pandemic, the estimates were that, not counting household waste, which are estimated as being at as much as 40% of what we buy in stores, we actually throw away, but not counting household waste, it was estimated that before the pandemic, there were 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food going to landfills, right? So the math equation that I do is 72 billion should not equal 35 million. 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food going to landfills should not happen in the same country where 35 million people are food insecure. So on the surface, that certainly presents frustration for me. But beneath that surface, it reminds me, wow, this is solvable. So we can do a better job. We can partner more deeply. We can understand how to be more effective in rescuing food. And we're right now the largest food waste recovery organization in the United States is the Feeding America. Have I mentioned I'm kind of proud of being associated with this group? Yeah, I'm kind of proud of being so. The only thing I've ever said to you that's in the least bit insincere is I said I'm very proud of being associated with this group, because there's so many things that the Feeding America Network does. And hopefully this audience understands I am a part of it, but I'm not even close to all of it. So I'm talking mostly about the remarkable ingenuity and great work of the people that I get to work with. So that's one of the statistics, though, that I look at and I said, well, we can match that up. We're already the largest food waste recovery organization in the United States. We can apply even better technology. We can have deeper partnerships, and we can match that food up better, so that instead of going to waste, it goes instead of filling a landfill, it can fill a belly. Fill a belly. Wow, those words just don't want to come. Instead of filling a landfill, it can fill a belly. There you go. That's the match that we can do. So there are those kinds of statistics. So most of them, though, are, like I said earlier, it's in the middle of it. There certainly is danger, but there's also remarkable opportunity. So I keep on seeing it. So I don't tend to stay inside of frustration. I tend to act my way out of frustration, right? So I'm in a movement that's designed to act my way out of frustration. But that would be the kind of thing.
Well said. The food box program was popular with COVID. Now, how will that program be sort of repurposed and continue to serve the communities now?
Yeah. One of the best things about the food box program, Farm to Families, was that there were more people who were able to engage in helping more people when so many people needed help. That was one of the most powerful things. I think it creates an opportunity going forward for us to rethink. When I talk about the 60,000 partners that the Feeding America Network considers a part of our network, it gives us an opportunity to think about some of those organizations who were not traditionally a part of the Feeding America Network, as an example, that we have a pathway for creating new partnerships with some of them. So I think that's fabulous. I think one of the challenges with the way that it got operationalized is the Feeding America Network, and there are other networks as well. I just happen to know ours best, right? So when I say these things, it's not designed to disparage what other people do. Is that I tend to speak about the things that I know best, and I know our network. Inside of the Feeding America network, we have very rigorous food safety standards. Very rigorous food safety standards. We also have an infrastructure that is unrivaled for delivering charitable food. So we have trucks, we have warehouses, we have refrigeration. Very, very importantly, we have highly skilled professionals who are deeply steeped in understanding how to deliver food and how to do it in an affirming way. So where I understand that the program is moving is toward using existing infrastructure, capitalizing on that infrastructure even more than we did during the food box program, the earlier iterations, and then looking at ways to capture what we learned in COVID, pull it forward, and bring with us some new partners going forward. So I'm really optimistic about where it's going. I also, you didn't ask this question, but I want to talk about it. I mentioned before, it was during COVID, actually, that I heard for the first time what maybe the rest of you have heard many times. I had heard someone who was talking about the storm metaphor. And I want to talk about two different metaphors, if you will indulge me. The first one is the storm metaphor, where I heard someone talking about the storm metaphor, saying that that we're all in the same boat. And I heard another person astutely observe, wait a minute. We may all be in the same storm, but we are seldom all in the same boat. And that's true. I have to come to terms with the reality that I live inside of privilege that many, well, the people that I'm signing up to serve do not have the benefit of the privileges that I have, right? I have to acknowledge that as true. I have to try to understand why is it so? And then I need to try to do something about the fact that it is in fact so. And I'm seeing a lot of work being put into that, to addressing equity, addressing what's happening in terms of access in rural America, addressing what's happening with communities of color across the country. What are some of the root causes that are giving rise to some of these inequities? So that's work that I'm seeing. And even as you look at what the USDA is doing, for instance, the USDA is looking specifically at how to invest more deeply in Black and BIPOC farmers, right? How to invest more deeply in Black and BIPOC communities. So I think that's really, really critically important to where it is that we need to go. And I'm excited about the prospect of not allowing ourselves to then talk about the next time there's an issue. I hope we never, of course, have one, but we will. The next time that there's some macro factor that we don't control, let's make sure that vulnerable communities are not laid bare in the way that they are this time. Let's put in place an infrastructure that's more sustainable, which leads me to the second metaphor. I really did believe that a perfect metaphor for our work was, if you give a man a fish, he'll fish for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, right? And it's only during the pandemic that it really stuck with me that I actually wasn't getting that right. Because it's so paternalistic, isn't it? It assumes that the man who's struggling or the woman who's struggling, that they need somebody to walk in and tell them how to fish. What if they know how to fish already? What if what they need is bait? What if what they need is a pole? I think we have this unique opportunity, a moment in time that we're in right now, where we could decide to actually go and co-create inside of communities. Not come into a community assuming that they don't know how to come up with their own solutions. Not come into a community with a whole bunch of strings attached to, we've got the purse, we've got the money, and therefore you're going to have to do it. our way, but instead come into communities in a co-creative way. Put the challenges in the middle of the table. Put the people who are going to be most impacted, or who we'd like to see positively impacted by the work, not only centered in the work, but at the table. My proposal around equity, diversity, inclusion is that we need bigger tables and more chairs. Bigger tables and more chairs. And I sometimes hear language that feels exclusive. And I think that's the opposite of what we need. It's not that we need less people. Let's say we're talking about challenges around communities of color. It's not that we don't need people who are not from communities of color at the table. We do. We also need people who are people of color at the table, and we need ideation that's happening as co-equals at that table. So, see, Evelyn, I slipped in something I just wanted to say, like I was going to do with the feedingamerica.org thing if you hadn't asked me. So thanks for indulging me an opportunity to say that too.
Evelyn, you're muted.
I love to talk and not be heard. You actually, that was great because some of the things that you said coincide with some more of the questions that were being asked. One is about the extent, to what extent minorities impacted or disproportionately impacted, were they impacted by the pandemic, excuse me, with regard to hunger and food insecurities?
Yeah, some more regrettable statistics that I'm bound and determined to be a part of changing. So if you are Latino or Latinx, you are 2 times more likely to be food insecure. If you're African American, you're 2.5 times more likely to be food insecure. If you are Indigenous or Native American, you are 3 times more likely to be food insecure. If you hail from any of those groups, you are at least 2 times more likely to suffer under the weight of chronic diseases that made COVID more lethal. There was a moment in time when death rates among people who were food insecure was double and sometimes 3 times as much as the general public. When I first started learning about COVID, February-ish timeframe of 2020, I knew these other hidden in plain view statistics. And I was horrified because I also knew that these communities that are already marginalized, that are already so vulnerable, that simply cannot bounce back in the same way that other parts of our society can. I knew that they were going to be hardest hit by this, and they have been. But again, I can't allow myself, and I work for people facing hunger. That's who I work for. I work for people facing hunger, with people facing hunger, in concert with other people, right? They can't afford for me to just sit inside of frustration. I have to participate in a process that makes it less likely that these communities will be as vulnerable when the next macro thing comes through. And as I said, I'm rather determined to do that.
Can you share information about resources for providers and community organizations who want to screen individuals for food insecurity? Programs like National Nudge, evidence-based, maybe 2 questions that can be integrated in social screenings.
Yes. Well, I have, there are a team of professionals well, throughout our network, and certainly there are members here at the Feeding America national offices who are much better positioned to answer questions like that than I. But I will say that we have a suite of questions that we have been providing to partners that help to screen for food insecurity. And some of the most vibrant partnerships that we have are partnerships that we have inside of the medical community, where people have been medical professionals have been helping to screen for food insecurity and then connecting people to the food that they need. We have some remarkably innovative things that have been happening inside of our membership, where people get screened for food insecurity. Let's say that they're suffering with type 2 diabetes. And they can connect with some of our members who actually provide them with foods that are specifically sensitive to the foods that they need in order with the food as medicine concept, in order to move along on a pathway away from food insecurity and away from chronic diabetes. We also have nudging, which you mentioned before, which has been extraordinary. And I've been inside of pantries where we have engaged nudging, where we have these choice pantries, and we know that there's science to the way that we interact with food, and that how you place the food inside of the room will impact whether or not people choose that food. So we use that type of analysis. Just as when I worked in retail, I knew that with bananas, stack them high and they'll buy. The same philosophy, these are the same humans who are interacting and engaging in each of these environments. And the same reason that some of the highest margin things, the things that they make the most profit off of in retail, are going to be right there when you're waiting in line and you don't really need any gum, but since it's there, right? So we can, rather than use that only, and I have nothing against capitalism, but rather than use that exclusively for a profit motivation, we can use it with a health motivation, and we are using it with the health motivation. So if there's anyone who has some follow-up questions where they'd like to go deeper with some experts, feel free to reach out. I hope there's a way I can provide you guys with contact information from me, and then I can connect you to whomever it is that you'd like to see. And I see Dr. Dr. Beatty can help us with that. So we'll make sure to match up. So anyone that has any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to connect you with the best resource. I'm happy to try to answer the question as well. But one of the best things about this work is I don't have to do it alone. There are lots of remarkable people that I get to partner with. So happy to respond. And I'm so excited that you guys are interested in knowing. So we want to tap into that for sure.
Absolutely. It's been a wealth of information. Am I on mute this time? No, a wealth of information, and still, lots of questions. I think the last one will be really quick though, because they wanted you to one more time go over the Mandarin word for disaster.
Okay, so with the caveat that I was told that actually is not what that word means, right? So I've been told that the concept for crisis in Mandarin, that the word for crisis was a combination of two words, and one which represents danger and the other which represents opportunity. And what I've seen in life is that is so true. That whether or not there's really a Mandarin word that really means that, the concept that inside of every single crisis, there's always danger, and we can usually see the danger, but there's always opportunity in it as well. And we should seek out the opportunity. And inside of this crisis, which is a crisis on top of a crisis on top of a crisis, there's remarkable opportunity for transformation. And what this work has done for me, there are people who have sat at home wondering how could they help, feeling helpless in many, many ways. Every day in this work, I get to know I'm a part of something that's moving people forward. And it's a powerful, powerful way to feel. So come and engage in the power, feedingamerica.org. Thank you guys so much for the invitation. Thank you, Dr. Beatty. I am so thrilled and honored that you would have thought that I could be of service here. I hope that I have been, and I look forward to coming to see you in person someday soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, for your passion and your head for math and your heart for people. We feel your passion, and it honestly, I know it inspires me to want to do a little bit more. I can do a little bit more to help that person to my right or to my left. So thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
also want to take a moment to remind everyone that the link is there for the survey. If you've not already completed that, feel free to do so. There's a lot of wonderful information, and I know it hits home to a lot of people. I'm sure most of us know someone who is struggling, or who is a paycheck away or a meal away. So definitely avail yourselves to the survey. Any other questions? As Ms. Claire mentioned, Dr. Beatty will help facilitate getting those questions to her, and she can get those questions answered or direct us to the people or organizations that we would need